Hello and welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage, on a beautiful fall Saturday at the end of September 2024. Almost feel guilty today. It's such a beautiful day here in the Northeast. Looking at the results of the hurricane that went through Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas, etc., Tennessee. It has to be awful to ride through the storm, which was dangerous enough, and then the storm surge, and then to face days and weeks, maybe longer, without power while your property lays in shambles, flooded, who knows how many feet high, with nasty water. And as soon as the storm goes away, it goes right back to being hot and humid. That's just miserable. I'm used to losing power up here in Maine in the wintertime for upwards of a week on end. You know, it's a lot easier to warm yourself than to cool yourself, I believe. Yesterday, I finished changing the case on a transmission I built for a friend of mine a few years ago. He blew the drive shaft out of the car and then eventually blew the engine. He's pretty hot on stuff. And he didn't know the bell housing was broken up around the top there until he went to unbolt the blown up engine. Then he realized he probably put a case in it at the same time. So it seems simple enough, but doing it and then thinking about it afterwards today while I was cleaning off my bench, little sidebar on my bench. I love this bench. I do everything on it, despite getting 5 or 6 other benches within the last year that I promised I'd keep clean on the top, which I haven't. This one I always kept clean in its entirety. Every time I'd finish a job or whatever was going on, it might be messy for a week at a time, but I would always clean it up before I started something else. Until, and I blame it on this, I bolted the crane, the yellow crane that swivels around that allows me to, lift all kinds of heavy stuff so I don't have to do it by hand anymore. Well, once you attach something to a free surface, it attracts other things. You're just gonna leave a spray bottle over here, and maybe a few knives or tools and a few other trinkets, and next thing you know, half the bench is missing. This has taken me, I was out here this morning, probably 7:30, and it's 3 something now. I just got this bench clean. I had a visitor, I ate lunch, but I was working pretty steady because I can't just move it somewhere else. I got to put it all away, and in a rare case, even threw some stuff away that was absolute junk, but part of me still wants to hang on to. Like some Taiwanese vice grips that didn't work, because maybe someday I might use a piece out of it. Well, I close my eyes and chuck them in the iron bin this time. I've hung on to them for a long time. And it's frustrating when you go to use them, because they're broken. So anyway, my bench is clean, and here we sit talking about this wonderful Turbo 400 case. So we could start almost anywhere, but you need to find yourself a similar donor case. There are a few changes over the years. You can probably make every one of them work, but you have to be aware of the changes that Chevrolet made, or GM. We've talked many times about the number of pump bolts, 6, 7, or 8. If having more than 6 is important, well, so is choosing the right case. Obviously, I kind of skipped over the bell housing bolt pattern. That's important, but that's kind of a no-brainer. All the cases, Chevrolet and others, come in various strengths. Like, for instance, this one's filled in down here. Chevrolet never had the ribs inside. Some cases have a cup plug where the speedo goes. Some actually are cast solid. I only have one of those, but they do exist. I showed it to you a few years ago. And it also happened to be a switch pitch torque converter transmission, and if it was a switch pitch, this is where things get tricky. This is a Chevrolet or a GM modification. This hole right here in the pump surface, which comes out down here, would have an orifice cup plug with a tiny hole in it. And you'd have to remove that if you were just trying to use that case in a normal transmission. More on that in a minute. The early cases, 64, 5, maybe 6, they don't have a linkage seal. There's O-rings on the shaft itself, 1 or 2. I have a O-ringed case, and I have the matching shift shaft, and it has 2 O-rings on it, which I think is pretty cool. I believe the Sonex replacement has 1, but hey, at least they offer you an O-ringed shaft if you have no provision for a linkage seal. And speaking of the linkage seal, don't be that guy that doesn't, remove the nut and the rooster and changes the seal. The case that I used to replace this was built locally by a guy that I know very well, and I took all the rusted stuff apart and pulled out the original linkage seal, as well as the original corroded O-ring on the electrical pass-through. That's just not my style. It takes extra time, but you're getting paid to do a job, or even if you're doing it for yourself, treat yourself nice and do it right. It only takes a little bit longer to do it right. Now things get really interesting. These transmissions are as old as I am. They've been around a long time. It's hard these days to find any that haven't been modified in some form. Be it your simple shift kit or any modifications over the many times they've been apart. And every transmission manufacturer has their own way of accomplishing whatever the product they're selling you is attempting to do. Oftentimes, they'll have you drilling holes. Like today, you can buy a trans brake that's going to require you to drill a hole down through the modulator passage out into the case. We have covered many times driving a cut plug in this hole, which is one in this hole right now, to dual feed it if it's necessary. With what you're doing, it may already be plugged. It may have a plug with holes in it that would have had a spring and a ball. That style is not real popular anymore because I guess they had a tendency to accidentally lock up the rear wheels every now and then if anything malfunctioned in that spring and ball. But it's still a modification. You got to make sure it's not there. Very often, there's a 1/4-inch check ball driven in the accumulator drain right here. It is in place in a situation where the accumulator is not doing anything anymore, but that passage that dumps out here also has a cut plug down here, and in a trans brake application, occasionally they would pop the cut plug out of the case, so you drive a check ball in here, and it prevents the stress on the rest of the circuit that isn't being used. In an aftermarket, like a reed case, that's not a concern anymore. You don't have to drive the 1/4-inch check ball in there. But if you're trying to use a case that the check ball's already been driven in that hole, it's not exactly easy to get it back out. I've driven in many of them and wondered how hard they were in there, how hard it would be to get it back out. Well, I've taken a few out just to experiment on cases I was going to throw away because they were destroyed. And let's just say you'd have to work gently for a long time because everything you do tries to drive that ball further in the hole unless you chip out a giant amount of aluminum. So if you see that and you don't need it for your intended application, you might want to choose another case. Back to the pump bolts for a minute. This is an excellent example of what could be a 7-bolt case. You could drill and tap right there. But for the 8th bolt that I call it, there's not even a boss for it anymore. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You could make it 7, but that's all she wrote. It's a common belief that the Olds, Pontiac, Buick, Cadillac cases were all 8-bolt. I have a 7. Actually, I might have used it, but I've had a 7. They do exist. Pretty rare. It was in the late 70s where all things GM were getting kind of funky. But so that's a brief overview of the things you should consider as well as condition. One of the cases I chose for the project I just did, it looked wonderful. It was actually almost too nice to use, but there was a crack right about here. Can it be welded? Sure, but not to give to somebody else. So I've said this before, a lot of people say, can't you just weld this or can't you weld that? Sure, but who wants it? You know, if you're gonna run it for yourself, great. If whoever's on the receiving end of getting it is okay with that. You know, we're not in that desperate times yet that there's not still plenty of cases out there. You know, we're not trying to restore some artifact. I just get another case, and I'll probably offer that other case to somebody that needs a dummy, a mock-up transmission, or if they want to weld it, maybe I'll weld it someday and use it for something I don't know. That's it for today, I guess. I hope you're having a great day. I won't say wasted, but I spent this entire beautiful day inside my shop, but that's not a waste. I spent a lot of time outside as well, and will in the upcoming months before winter sets in. I got a lot of outside stuff to do, so today had to happen. I needed this bench clean just for sanity purposes, if nothing else. So I don't mean cleanliness, I mean sanity. All right, take care. Bye.